Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Hello and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here, also a proud member. And it's my joy and pleasure to welcome you all to today's forum, a panel conversation on the upcoming Republican and Democratic National Conventions and what is becoming the most unconventional, get it? Conventions? Unconventional? Presidential election in American history. For months, Americans have watched the number of presidential hopefuls for major political parties dwindle from 23 to 2. We watched Donald Trump vanquish 17 other Republican presidential hopefuls. The Democrats are also down to one sole candidate after Bernie Sanders endorsed Hillary Clinton just this week. But the drama is, of course, far from over. Party leaders and their presumptive nominees are now about to take the stage at the Republican and Democratic National Conventions, officially beginning their general election campaigns. And how will they go? It's hard to say. James Wegman, a spokesman for Republican Senator Ben Sasse, quipped recently, "With these two candidates, this election remains a dumpster fire." It could be much better than that, though. We'll see. The 2016 presidential election slate contains two of the most unpopular presidential candidates in American history, according to some polls. And with that comes so many questions. Does this represent a tipping point in American politics? Will we see major changes to the party's operating philosophies? There's some serious 11th hour business here. So we've assembled a panel of national experts to discuss the upcoming RNC in Cleveland, the upcoming DNC in Philadelphia, and the general election as well. Leading our conversation is Dr. John C. Green. He's the director of the Bliss Institute of Applied Politics at the University of Akron, one of our great partners here at the City Club. That institute is a bipartisan research and teaching institute dedicated to the nuts and bolts of practical politics. He's also a senior fellow with the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life and is best known for his work on religion and politics. And Dr. Green, it's my pleasure to turn it over to you to introduce our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's really a great honor to be here at the City Club again with a very distinguished panel to talk about the conventions, the one beginning here in Cleveland just next week, and then right on the heels of that convention, the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia. And so let me introduce our panel, and then we'll talk a little bit, and then we'll turn it over, of course, to your questions, which is one of the important things that the City Club always does. On my immediate left is Jim Gilmore, who was the chairman of the Republican National Committee in 2001, and among other things was the governor of Virginia. Welcome, good to have you with us.
Thank you, John.
Right next to Governor Gilmore is Susan Page, who is the Washington bureau chief for USA Today. And it seems like Susan and I have spoken to each other for many, we won't say how many years, many years. Welcome, Susan, good to have you with us. And then in addition, we have David Wilhelm, who was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee in 1993 and 1994. David, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to start just with a couple of basics. What are national conventions supposed to do? Who are the people in the building when they do whatever it is they're supposed to do? And how did they get there? David, would you like to take a crack at that from the Democratic perspective?
From the Democratic perspective? Well, they're there to nominate your standard bearer. Let's start at the beginning. But to present the Democratic Convention and my brief theory of conventions, I think we start with the fact that the Democratic Convention is a lot larger than the Republican Convention. We have about 4,700 people that attend the Democratic Convention. The Republican Convention is about half that size. We have superdelegates at the Democratic Convention, consisting of members of the Democratic National Committee, members of the United States House of Representatives and Senate, as well as Democratic leaders, that constitutes about 15% of the total delegation. That is different from the Republican Party. We have very specific targets related to the participation of minorities. That is also very different from the Republican convention, where this time only 18 delegates out of 2,300 are African American, less than 1% of the Republican convention delegates will be African American. About 40% of the delegates to the Philadelphia Convention will be in support of Bernie Sanders, and about 60% in support of Hillary Clinton. So that's what our convention looks like, and I'm sure we'll go into more of this as we go on. But I think conventions are there to nominate the candidate, provide the candidate with unity moving forward. It provides the candidate with an opportunity to define the terms of the debate moving forward, like no other opportunity that exists, with the exception of the debates. So it is a very, very, very important moment in the life of a campaign. And so I'll end with that, but that's what it's going to look like in Philly. It'll look different here in Cleveland.
Well, Governor Gilmore, tell us a little bit about who's going to be here in Cleveland next week and about the Republican National Convention.
Well, I think certainly to dive right in, the topic that I think people should be thinking about is the evolution of American politics over the years. Certainly when the parties were formed, at the very beginning of the Republic, as a matter of fact, back with the Federalist Party, and then later on the Jeffersonian Party after that, it was like-minded people who came together with a philosophy of government in order to try to nominate a candidate to present before the people of the United States. I don't think we do that anymore in the United States. The progressive movement, which was very much an origin here at this club, at the Cleveland Club, began the process of developing primaries. And primaries were intended to take things away from the back rooms and the big moneyed interests and so on like that, and to give it more back to the people. Well, when you get into the question of open primaries, you're not really offering the candidates to Republicans and Democrats at all. You're offering them to the general public. It's just a little preliminary election, you see. And now, if you get into binding the delegates in accordance with state law to come into the convention here, and I think in other places, then they're bound. I think there really is a question of whether or not the parties are really in control of their own nomination process at all, particularly the Republican Party, where I won't monopolize the whole time here, but I want to get a chance to spin this out a little bit. But I really question right now whether the candidates are being chosen by the parties at all. I think the question is really with the emergence of political television, of which Susan is very prominent on political television on these cable channels, and with the presentation of ideas and the exposure of candidates, which, by the way, is done for compensation, for ad money. If you get into that, the question is, what are the American people seeing? Who are they getting a chance to understand? Who are they going to the polls to vote for? And then who are they creating? So many of these delegates at this Republican convention, they'll call the roll of the states, but what difference does it make, really? The delegates are bound. They have no choice. So they're not getting really to choose anything here at this convention. And I think this has been an evolution of American politics, which we could spin out further.
Yeah. David,
just jumping in real quickly, and that is different from the Democratic Party at this point in our nation's history. The Democrat, I don't think that a single delegate to the Democratic Convention is formally bound. Now, there would be hell to pay back home if you voted some other way, but no delegate is formally bound. And we also have 15% of the total delegation that consists of superdelegates or in some manner party elders who are there to represent the broader judgment of the party. And so it does cause one to think, what might have happened if a Trump-like character emerged within the Democratic Party? There would have been a much greater ability to go, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Almost did.
But
Almost did. But you have bound. But your delegates are bound by primaries. Your delegates are bound.
not formally bound.
They can actually violate. Your delegates selected
Yes.
can violate the closed primaries of the Democratic
But
Party.
it's a distinction without a difference because
They don't.
Democratic convention delegates are required to be chosen by the campaign that won the caucus or primary. So unlike the Republicans, where you have people who are bound to vote for Trump but actually are Cruz supporters, which led to the possibility of the kind of rules change we saw that did not pass last night by the Rules Committee. Democrats, the Clinton campaign chose the Clinton delegates. The Bernie Sanders campaign chose the Bernie Sanders delegates. So they don't need to be bound because they are aligned with the candidate they're representing, whereas the Republicans have all the possibilities for a coup because you don't have that kind of rule in the Republican Party.
Well, Susan, let me pick up on that. As you know, in the primaries, the selection process, both the Democratic side and the Republican side, is very, very contentious. A lot of people thinking maybe, to quote a well-known public figure, that the system was rigged. Could you tell us what that was all about?
So first I have to say two things about Cleveland, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The first is, I was born in Kansas and raised in Kansas. In fact, I had not left the state until I went to college. That's how Kansas I am. And last week I got, and I'm not going to lift my leg to show you all this, but I got a sunflower tattooed on my ankle, appalling my husband, who is with us in the thing. So I am really Kansas through and through. So I am really indebted to Cleveland, because at your last convention here in 1936, the Cleveland Convention nominated Alf Landon, the governor of Kansas. We're not like Virginia. We're not the state of president. So this is a very big deal to be in Kansas. Thank you very much. And my other warm spot for Cleveland is that I occasionally guest host the Diane Rehm Show on NPR. And Cleveland carries the Diane Rehm Show, and I know that because we get all these smart phone calls from people in Cleveland. I bet some of you have called into the Diane Rehm Show. Well, I'll tell Diane that she got a round of applause here, but I know she's grateful. We're all grateful that you listen to the show, and that when there's a call from Cleveland, I know that's going to be somebody smart on the line. You know, you talk about how contentious these primaries and caucuses were in choosing the convention delegates, and that is certainly true, and how unexpected, given that if you had said a year ago that Hillary Clinton would not have reached clinching the nomination against Bernie Sanders, the 73-year-old socialist senator from Vermont, that she would still be battling him at the point that Donald Trump had cleared the field of governors and senators on the Republican side. Nobody predicted that. So it has been really a contest for the record books from the start. And some of these convention rules, I think, are going to change. Don't you think Democrats may curtail some of the superdelegates at the convention?
Well,
not at this
I
convention,
hope not,
but for
because
future.
I'm a superdelegate. Let's slow down here.
And
Maybe. I mean, I think there's a legitimate question whether 15% is the right number. I think there's an important role, though, played by superdelegates, because I don't think there is. I think the convention, I talked about the theory of the convention, I think it should be greatly informed by the results of the primaries and caucuses. But it doesn't have to be exclusively informed. There is a party, a permanent party, a national party that exists outside of the moment of the election. There are senators and governors and mayors that have to run with this nominee, and I think they deserve a say also. So one can question whether or not 15% is the right number, but I think there is a definite role for superdelegates. And then just real quickly, your other point about the fact that our primary season is designed to go a long time because of proportional representation. The Republicans have some states that are winner take all. So you can win 35% of the vote like Donald Trump did in state after state after state and take all of the delegates. That leads to a quick conclusion. The Democratic primary season, by contrast, delegates are proportionality by the proportionate share of the vote that they receive. And so it is designed almost to go longer.
Governor Gilmore, what do you think? Should the Republicans think about superdelegates or something like that for their convention going forward?
I think it's authoritarian and fascistic myself. I don't think we ought to be doing that.
Do I look like a fascist?
I actually was one of those Republican candidates in the presidential race, one of the 17, as a matter of fact, myself. But I'm not even in the Virginia delegation. I'm not only not a superdelegate, I'm not a delegate at all. And the reason is because the Cruz people decided to take over the Republican convention and salt the delegation from Virginia with Cruz people. They're almost entirely Cruz people. And the reason was because they were trying to create a situation where they could break the rules down and to create an open convention where then these delegates, who may not reflect the primaries at all across the United States of America, in fact, they wouldn't, could then come in and vote for Cruz. Now, John, I hasten to say that in my view only, well, and everybody else's view, and probably including David's, if we did end up doing that in Cleveland this week and ended up with Ted Cruz emerging as the candidate or somebody else emerging as a candidate, the millions of voters who are angry today and who voted for Donald Trump because they're angry and they want to change the country and change the system, in my view, would abandon the Republican candidate. And at that point, Hillary Clinton would walk into the presidency.
Susan, let me turn back to you. I know you've covered a lot of conventions. What are you going to be looking for next week in Cleveland?
So a couple things to look for. Inside the hall, how united are Republicans? A lot of Republicans, senior Republicans, are going to be missing from inside the hall, which is a sign of divisions in the Republican Party. But even inside the hall, do they have good control over it? This is the least scripted convention in modern times. You know, usually by now we know who's going to speak, when they're going to speak. The nominee, the presumptive nominee, is at this point going through their speeches to say why they can and cannot say. That's not happened this time. We don't even know who's speaking most of these nights. The campaign said yesterday Tim Tebow was going to speak. Today he said no, he's not. So that is something new. I think look outside the hall too. What kind of protests do we see? You're going to see, I think, very heavy security going up in the next 48 hours in Cleveland, and we expect big protests. We'll be watching to see how those go, what that reflects. And the final thing I think there are many things to look for, but the final thing I would say to particularly look for is Donald Trump's tone and his message, because he has gotten this far with a very blustery, outspoken, provocative set of policies, expressing them in a provocative way. And there's some thought that he needs to take advantage, he has a second chance to make a first impression at a convention, and that he needs to do that to reach some voters who are now very skeptical about him.
David, what are you going to be looking for in Cleveland? And then we'll ask you about Philadelphia the week afterwards.
I have no idea what to look for in Cleveland. It is completely unpredictable. It is a unique combination of something that is completely unpredictable, and I don't know when the stakes have been higher for a given candidate at a given convention. It is an enormous chance for him to emerge perhaps with a more unified party. It's an enormous chance for him to reintroduce himself to the country. The events of the last couple of weeks may have provided him with more of an opportunity than existed, and there may be more Americans willing to give him that second chance. So I think the stakes are enormous. The question is, will he be able to take advantage of it? Will he have the discipline to be able to take advantage of it? If his reintroduction is bizarre and undisciplined and erratic, then he will have failed. He will have failed to take advantage of the moment that has been presented to him. But if there is something approaching, he's not going to have party unity among the Republican Party as a whole, but at least in the convention hall, he might be able to approach that. Then it's an opportunity. I'd also say, just quickly, at the Democratic Party, convention in Philadelphia, Hillary also has some of the same opportunities. She may be the least well-known person in America. People go up and down with respect to their opinion about her. It wasn't that long ago, a year and a half ago, she had favorabilities of around 60%. Now it's low 30s. Well, which is it? And she has an opportunity to reintroduce herself to the American people and to frame the campaign in a way that benefits her. Will she be able to do it? So big stakes for both. I think they're larger for Donald Trump, but a big opportunity for Hillary.
Well, Governor Gilmore, what will you be looking for?
Well, I would disagree with David on a couple of points. I don't think the Republican convention is particularly unpredictable. It may not be scripted the way the Bushes always scripted everything, and I participated in some of that. That was awful, and it was very, very carefully scripted. This is disorganized somewhat because Trump did not run a classic political campaign in modern America. Modern America has changed. He understood that if you were dynamic enough, you appealed to anger and resentment, which is the dominant emotion in American politics today and American society today, in so many different ways. It reflects itself right now in so many different ways, including Baton Rouge, Dallas, and in a lot of other ways. You're seeing just enormous anger and resentment in the country and a desire for change. And he found, if I can dominate the airwaves, then I can create a whole different political paradigm, and that's what he's done. But at the end of the day, the primaries have decided this matter, and I believe that it's very predictable. I would be very surprised if this thing just didn't go off exactly the way that it was expected. Hillary Clinton, of course, I'm a partisan, and David knows that, and Susan knows that. I think she's got a lot of problems. The people of the United States have decided today that she's dishonest by a ratio of 2 to 1. 2 to 1, people believe that Hillary Clinton is dishonest. That is set in. So now the question the people of the United States have to ask is, are we going to put a person we are convinced is dishonest into the White House? And you know what, with Donald Trump, they might. They might. They might, because Donald Trump is an entirely new thing, and we've never seen anything quite like that before, but that's more to the general election. I do not believe that this is going to be an unpredictable convention in Cleveland.
Well, Susan, give us handicap the conventions. What chance do you think the parties are of emerging united from Cleveland and Philadelphia?
You know, I think conventions are, as you said, as both the other speakers said, big opportunities. And you think about how much difference can they make. You know, they often don't make very much difference, but they are an opportunity to introduce yourself to people who may not have paid much attention. Although now people have a lot of alternatives of other things to watch that convention speech, and I suspect a lot of people will. But you think back to, say, the 1992 conventions, which you were a part of. The 1992 Democratic Convention, what were you doing there?
What was I? I was the campaign manager.
You were the campaign manager, so you may have been attending, busy, all that. But that was a great convention. And that was a convention that helped Bill Clinton and Al Gore get elected. It was in New York. It was a well-run convention. You had a message. People got a sense of them. They came out of that convention stronger than they went in. But the 1992 Republican convention. Now, Governor, what were you doing then?
I have no idea.
Yeah, okay. So
what I was doing in 1992.
Okay. Was in Houston, and that was a terrible convention for Republicans because George H.W. Bush was being renominated over opposition. Pat Buchanan, who had challenged him, who was kind of a version of Trump, although less successful, gave this famous "the culture wars here" speech, repelled a lot of swing voters, solidified his stance with some Republican core voters, but really put off some swing voters, made it harder for George H.W. Bush to win re-election, and then he didn't. So if you look at that, it seems to me the Democrats are in a better position to do what they did this time, what they did in 1992, and the Republicans are very much at risk of doing what they did in 1992 at their convention, which makes it harder for them to win in November.
In 1992, Bill Clinton was in third place going into the convention. And we did polling in advance of the convention, and we found out that more people knew that he attended Yale. Do you attend to, where do you go to school?
Yale. Yes. You should know this, by the way.
Yeah, well, I know, yeah. It was Yale. It was one of those elite schools. I'm an Ohio University guy myself. Georgetown, yes. Okay.
He went to Georgetown, he went to Yale Law School.
But anyway, more people knew that he'd gone to Yale, even though I didn't know it. But then he grew up in Hope, Arkansas. And so that is a classic example of the convention presenting the ability to reintroduce somebody. And so we had the Man from Hope video. And he selected a vice presidential candidate that doubled down on his own attributes, which is one theory of vice presidential selection. So that was a very, very successful convention. I would say the 2012 convention for Barack Obama was successful in that it allowed him to establish the basic construct of the choice. Do we move forward or do we move back? And the seminal moment was Bill Clinton's speech defining the terms of the debate, which everybody remembers and everybody says, wow, that was such a great speech. The reason it was so great was that he did what Barack Obama himself could not do as well, which was frame the essential choice of the debate. So I do think, as maligned as they are often, conventions turn out to be very, very important moments in the life of presidential campaigns.
We're just about to go to questions, but Governor Gilmore, we'll let you have the last word.
Well, just this. Again, I think that the Cleveland Club and all of us should be focused on whether America and American politics has changed or not. That's the question, I think, before us. When I talked to one of my consultants last year, and he said, you don't understand, Gilmore. He said, politics is showbiz now. It's showbiz. It's not politics, it's showbiz. I wish it was policy, ladies and gentlemen. I really would like this thing to get around to terrorism and the economy and so on like that. I don't think we're going there today. But the question is this. Trump understands some of these things. He should. He was right. He did the Apprentice show for all those years. He entered this primary contest, one of the best-known Republicans in the history of the world, because the United States had been watching The Apprentice for years and years. Showbiz. And this convention is going to be largely showbiz. The Democrats, on the other hand, are much more staid. They are. If you get away from the socialists for a minute, which I think they're going to, then we're going to be looking at the president and the former president and some of these other much more standard type of political figures. The press has been talking about that. And frankly, I think the Democrats are in danger of becoming boring compared to the showbiz that I suspect that Cleveland is going to be presenting this week.
Who would have thought that?
Dan.
Well, you can nominate Bernie. That'll do it.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're enjoying a Friday Forum panel, a very unconventional and completely informative and delightful Friday Forum panel, I should say, on the upcoming Republican and Democratic national conventions and the entire 2016 presidential election, featuring, the last voice you heard was that of Jim Gilmore, former chair of the Republican National Committee, former governor of Virginia, Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief at USA Today, and David Wilhelm, former chair of the Democratic National Committee. Our moderator is Dr. John Green, the director of the Ray C. Bliss Institute of Applied Politics at the University of Akron. We're about to head into the Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, and those of you joining us via our radio broadcast, our webcast, our new live simulcast at the Parma Snow branch of the Cuyahoga County Public Library. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will try to work it into the program. If you are asking a question here in the room, we ask you to stand up to ask your question. Wait until our mic folks are with you. Stand up and just please make sure that your question is brief and to the point. Holding our microphones today are Stephanie Jansky, our Director of Programming, and our Content Coordinator, Teddy Eisenberg. May we have our first question, please?
Good afternoon. You're right, Dan. This has been delightful. The gentleman from representing the Democratic Convention, you mentioned that there were 18 out of, I think, 2,500 delegates who were minority with the Republican Convention. I don't think I heard you mention how many minority delegates are going to be at the Democratic Convention.
I don't know what the number is, but it's a lot. And it is. It's, I would guess 20% will be African American. There are very specific targets that each state must achieve in the presentation of their state delegation. So the number is very, very high. I will get you the number because it's a point.
I can Google it, but I just wanted to.
Well, you know what? I Googled it. It's not as easy to come by as you think. I Googled it on the way up here. It's killing me that I don't have it.
Okay.
And it wasn't something I could immediately pull up. But it is a point that Democrats can point to with great pride, the diversity of the party. When it comes to gender representation, we are 50-50. In terms of our state delegations. We have specific requirements for Hispanics and the LGBT community and Asians. So it is a very, very diverse convention hall for real when it comes to the Democratic Party.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for coming today. First, I have a comment. It's very interesting that the Democrats are on the left and the Republicans are on the right.
Entirely coincidence.
My question is, here in Ohio, if the election had been held a week earlier, I could have been at the convention because I was an alternate for Dr. Ben Carson in the 11th District. And here in Ohio, the candidates picked their delegates, not the party. Would that be a good way to solve this problem like Cruz or Trump or Rubio attempting to hijack a delegation after a state had voted elsewise? And I would like both you to answer that. Thank you.
Governor Gilmore?
I'm not sure I understood the concept of what you're saying. You mean the candidate picked their own delegates?
And we had to sign up and be approved and file with the Secretary of State to be represented if the Ohio had gone back to the way it was before, where they had statewide delegates and then congressional delegates.
I think that's perfectly fine, but the candidate's still got to carry the state in order to be able to have that particular group of people elected to go to the convention. And I don't think that's different from what you were laying out that the Democrats do, I believe.
Yeah, in the Democratic Party, each candidate has an authorized representative for each state. And that authorized representative does sign off on the delegation. And that authorized representative, I have been the authorized representative before. It's a very powerful position, actually. You have the ability to cross off somebody that you feel is not an appropriate member of your delegation. I learned that very early in life. When I was a sophomore at Ohio University, I was the delegate recruiter for Jimmy Carter in the state of Ohio. I was it. I knew everybody in the state. I went to the Akron statewide caucus and ran for delegate. Didn't tell the national operation I was going to do it. I finished third statewide as a 19-year-old. The authorized representative said, your staff sorry, and made me an alternate. You have that power. And I think that does strengthen the loyalty of the delegation to the, obviously, to the
Let me
nominee.
try to take a stab at the answer here. If you didn't, look, the primaries are picking the delegate or binding the delegates. But then the local state conventions are actually choosing the individuals that go. And that's how you end up with this dichotomy of Trump carrying the state and the delegates being bound, but the Cruz people taking over the conventions and then sending their people against the hope that somehow this whole thing could be disrupted. I think that it's a very interesting question that we can have nationwide. You could start the debate right here if you choose to, as to whether or not we ought to be doing these primaries. In the modern age in which the airways are dominating things, you can't even buy enough advertising to compete with CBS, NBC, MSNBC, and all those agencies that are out there actually telling you plus and minus about the candidates. Maybe we ought to be going back to the smoke-filled rooms. Maybe we ought to be saying that people who engage themselves in the political process, and by the way, it's an open process. You don't have to do anything to join a political party in America, but just join. If you care about civic things, maybe the conventions ought to be picking the candidates and the people who are going to go on behalf of candidates. I've seen all these conventions in my lifetime where you offer a Carson slate and a Trump slate and a Cruz slate, and then the convention decides which slate gets to go, right? It's perfectly reasonable and perfectly logical. Instead, today, we bequeath that decision to the general public who has been watching The Apprentice for 10 years. Okay? That's what we're doing. So that is the process that we now have today in the United States of America. I think it's a very open question after this particular presidential election as to whether or not both parties ought to be reviewing exactly the way that they're picking their candidates.
Susan, what do you think, having covered the primaries and the caucuses and everything in between?
I think that, and this is my 10th presidential campaign, I think the parties have become decreasingly influential, the party structure. Donald Trump was certainly the last choice of the party structure in the Republican Party, and he's the one that prevailed. And I think the Democratic establishment has been stunned by the rise and success of Bernie Sanders, who wasn't even a Democrat until he decided to run for the nomination. But I'm not sure this is a reversible process where you can go back to smoke-filled rooms. I think it's a process where the parties matter less, and it's as though each individual is his or her own party. Bernie Sanders is his own party, and so is Donald Trump, and they both did pretty well this year.
I think that's very wise.
Go ahead, David.
My theory is conventions are imperfect. They're imperfect. You do your best to come up with the best possible candidate to present before to the American people. You do it through open primaries in some states. You do it through closed primaries in some states. You do it through caucuses in some states. You do it through superdelegates. You do it, there's no perfect way to assess at a given moment or even over a period of time who the exact candidate is that is the will of the party. So you kind of got to live with that imperfection. It's okay. I think there's a role for superdelegates. I think there's a role for caucuses. I think there's a role for open primaries. I think there's a role for closed primaries. And out of that amalgam, out of that stew, comes the convention in Philadelphia. And it's not perfect. It's not perfect, but I do think it is meaningful. And it's the best we can do. I don't think it's reversible. I don't really want to go back to smoke-filled rooms, but I do want to assert the rightful place of sort of the permanent Democratic Party within the convention. So I don't know. That's my theory of conventions. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good.
Let me lay out a little something different. And I'm not talking about going to a corrupt system. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm actually posing the question of whether or not the selection process can actually be representative of a political party in modern America. But let me tell you the experience of this with respect to the debates. Now, the debates were showbiz. Make no mistake about that. They were widely publicized, lots of pictures of the candidates being flashed up. The networks decided how the polling was going to be selected as to who was going to get in and in what order, and whether they were going to be on the undercard or the overcard, and whether they were going to stand on the lectern, all those things, showbiz. And who decided all that, ladies and gentlemen? I'm going to ask you. Susan, you probably do know. I don't know. The fact is that those decisions were made in the back smoke-filled room by producers of those networks. I don't even know who they are. You don't know who they are either. But they were enormously influential in the selection process and the primary system. If you take the debates, the primary system, and the rise of the political television networks and put that together, I happen to believe that that is a new development in modern political thought in the United States of America.
I agree that the debates were very, in the Republican, particularly in the Republican primaries, the debates were really influential. And when you had 17 candidates, I think there was a struggle to figure out how you had an effective debate with 17 candidates on stage. And a lot of criticism for the system that kind of evolved, which was to have 2 debates and to have participation determined by polling, and certainly lots of criticism. But it was, I think it was the result of the networks that were sponsoring the debate trying to figure out how can you make this work. I think a lot of even at this point, kind of the midpoint of the campaign, a lot of thinking about what role the news media has played in this. The debates are a good example. The tendency of cable TV in particular to take Donald Trump rallies and just run them forever gave him an enormous advantage. And they did that because he is a ratings bonanza. You tune into a Donald Trump rally, how can you turn away? You never know what he's going to say next. And yet, that gave him a huge advantage over his Republican rivals and also over Hillary Clinton. When we had primary results, primary nights, the cable networks would take Trump at great length, and Clinton would win a primary, and they would take her give her much less play than they gave him. So these are things. You said conventions are imperfect. The news media is imperfect too, and these are things we really try to think about in a thoughtful way, and especially when it's over, after you've made the best decision you can, you try to figure out what did you do that you could have done better, what would have been fair, what would have been better for the role that the press plays in a democracy.
But before we turn to the next question, I just want the record to show that smoke-filled rooms are illegal.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Dennis Driscoll, and my question is, what are your insights of Mr. Trump announcing his vice presidential choice of Governor Pence by a tweet after canceling the formal news conference to announce it?
Governor Gilmore?
First of all, I think it was perfectly reasonable for him to cancel any type of press conference after the catastrophe that occurred in Nice. And I would just love to come back to a forum like this and just discuss the international terrorism issue with all of you all. But clearly it would have been disrespectful. And also, practically speaking, I'm sure David and Susan would agree, you would step on your story too. There's no point in announcing Governor Pence in the middle of that kind of catastrophe, because after all, at the end of the day, the press was only covering that. Quite properly. It is a major issue facing the Western world today, the entire world today. It was dominating everything, still is, by the way, to this minute. So, why not announce it on social media? Social media is obviously, I think its best days are still ahead, actually, of the social media. But I believe with Facebook and Twitter, you can now reach out to a lot more people. And I think that it didn't matter. The minute that he did Twitter and announced it, it immediately went on television, right? So that's where the primary communication was done.
Susan, what do you think about that?
I think this was a really messy process for Donald Trump, and the messiest vice presidential selection process, I guess, since Eagleton and McGovern in 1972, because there was that moment, there were about a couple hours where we thought maybe he had reconsidered Pence and gotten to New York and now was going to change his mind. So if a vice presidential choices, I think, don't matter a lot. Once in a while they matter some. They do tell you something about the decision-making process of a prospective president. And this struck me as not a process that made Donald Trump look like a decisive leader. I thought it was a kind of a stumble. That said, he ends up with a vice presidential nominee who I think will reassure a lot of establishment Republicans and may be great in the general election. But you're really looking for, maybe Dave could talk about this with the announcement of Gore. You want to convey, I think, when you're choosing a vice president, it's one of those 2 or 3 moments, like your convention speech and the debates, where Americans kind of tune in to take a look at you, including some Americans that, unlike the people in this room, are not consumed by politics. You were managing that campaign. What were you looking to achieve, just with the process of choosing Gore?
To be honest about it, those of us who managed the campaign day to day, we were completely outside. There was a secret process that was run by others. So we had opinions, but at the end of the day, I think Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton is a big believer in driving your competitive advantage, figuring out your competitive advantage and drive it all day long. And so it's not surprising that when he thought about his own vice president, how do I double down on my competitive advantage? I'm going to choose somebody that's just like me. And that's how he thought about it. I do think that while the process looked very erratic, the choice of Governor Pence from a political standpoint is a pretty solid one. And I think, the last thing, I was so hoping for Newt Gingrich. Because he would have been doubling down on his own, fill in the words. I heard a lot of appropriate words. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to be more balanced. He wanted to be reassuring. You used the perfect word. And I think that choice did it. So the process was erratic. I think the outcome was good. I think Hillary's thought process is not likely to be the same as Bill Clinton's. I think she may look for balance. I think she's got to run her own campaign that is different from Barack Obama's campaign. If I were her, I would be thinking about the Electoral College pretty hard. And I would be thinking about how can I do a little bit better among white voters than previous Democratic candidates have. Romney got 59% of the vote among white voters. So I think, if you're her and you're her campaign, I think you're going to think about very specific electoral and voting targets, and maybe even states. And that's why I think you see Senator Kaine rise to the top. You see a guy like Secretary Vilsack. Where did he come from? Well, it kind of makes sense. Sherrod Brown would make all kinds of sense, but for the fact that his replacement would be appointed by a Republican governor. Who? John Kasich. I don't know who the appointment would be. I don't even know if he's going to be made vice president. But we were talking beforehand about it. You can go online, 538, and you can play with that, what is it called? It's like a model electoral college, and you can play with what you think the assumptions will be in terms of the vote turnout and vote preference of key demographic groups. And if you start playing with white working class voters and give Trump more, and he's going to get more, substantially more, Hillary's going to get more highly educated whites, but let's stick with the working class point. If you play with that, give Trump what he's likely to get, what states become immediately problematic for the Democratic nominee? Ohio? Not Florida. No. Wisconsin and Iowa. Pennsylvania comes in there soon enough. But those are the three. And so, Sherrod Brown. I start wondering about Kaine because there's an argument to be made that you win Virginia anyway in the context of a 50-50 race. You may think that you lose Ohio anyway in the context of a 50-50 race. So these are the things that get thought through, but I got to believe that that's what Hillary is thinking about right now.
Well, she's not going to carry Virginia if I have anything to do with it. And I mean, it's astonishing to think that she would get the highly educated people and college educated. That's a condemnation of higher education in this country. But but look, if you look at the selection on the Trump side,
shot, it's okay.
I think all this discussion about this selection process on the Democratic side is kind of creepy, and the Republican side too. But if you first of all, those four people that Donald Trump was considering would not have been my four that I would have been considering, not at all. But of the four that he looked at, I think he picked the one that was the soundest one, with Governor Pence. Why? Because of the same thing I'll follow up with David saying. How is the Republican Party going to win? Actually, this could be very transformative. But one way that we could win would be to hold the South, and add the industrial Midwest, and take Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Now, I personally think that we've probably got to do one more transformation to get that done. But that seems to be what he was kind of looking at here by going with Governor Pence, at least trying to get into that industrial Midwest. And one more thing, it's sound political theory. The people in the United States who are most angry today and want change are working men and women in the industrial Midwest, who feel that they've been ripped by the trade policies in this country and they've lost jobs to globalism. They feel it very strongly. They're going to vote for Donald Trump. So if he can do something to break into that, and for example, he's tied right now in Pennsylvania, which is amazing. And if he carries Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and you hold the South, which I think the Republicans will do, then at that point you're in the game. And suddenly this decisive disadvantage the Republicans have been facing for our generation now may disappear. Something new could happen.
Well, I think we have time for at least one more question.
Great.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you very much. This has been a fascinating discussion, so thank you to all of you. And to Mr. Wilhelm, a proud OU graduate myself. We call it the Harvard on the Hawking. So, so for those who might be new here,
Harvard's lucky to be in our class.
I love it. So one of the things that's interesting to me is the conversation, the relationship between the parties themselves and the general public. And one of the interesting statistics for me is Jill Stein has received 1,000% more donations. Governor Johnson, Libertarian Party, is at 12%. I'm very interested in hearing the panel's thoughts on the effects of third parties on the general election.
Susan, would you like to address that?
You know, that's a great question, because with Hillary Clinton's the most unpopular presidential nominee in our history since polling began, except for Donald Trump. So you would think there would be an opening for a third-party candidate. And this year, the Libertarians and the Green Party both expect to be on all 50 state ballots, plus the District of Columbia, which is remarkable. You know, that is a big achievement given that states try to keep the political establishment in states try to keep third parties off the ballot. You know, I think it's hard to see them winning, but could you see them affect the outcome? In a close race, yes. And the polling we have so far, I think shows that Gary Johnson, the Libertarian in particular, draws from both parties in a surprising way. And one of the things because you might think he would hurt Trump more, you know, that you might think Republicans would be more likely to go there. That hasn't really been the effect in the polling that we've seen in some states. and nationwide so far. And one of the things that is most alarming to the Clinton campaign is the idea that millennial voters who went for Bernie Sanders in a big way continue to be suspicious of Hillary Clinton, will not vote for Donald Trump. But that doesn't necessarily mean they'll vote for Hillary Clinton. They don't have a big Democratic voting history. That they could be drawn to a candidate like Gary Johnson or somebody like Jill Stein is very much a concern to the Clinton side. I think if you wanted to ask which campaign is more worried about third-party candidates, it'd be the Democrats.
David?
Well, most of the data that I've seen at this point suggests that it splits about 50-50. I think a lot of it depends on what happens during the course of the general election campaign, how the issues are defined, whether people think they're wasting their vote or not, or whether that vote actually is meaningful. So I think it depends on a lot of things. The last time we had a third-party candidate, that was the campaign I was very involved in. It was Ross Perot. Ross Perot, to the amazement of just about everybody, got 19% of the vote on election day. I don't think people viewed the race as that close, the race between Bill Clinton and President Bush at that moment. So I think they felt they had the ability to give that vote away and make a statement. But when we analyzed who the second choices were of the voters for Ross Perot, it split exactly 50-50. Certainly the average Perot voter leaned Republican, but the average Perot voter was for change. And so it kind of like went right down the middle. In fact, the only state that would have changed, where the outcome would have been changed, was the state of Ohio, which Bill Clinton won by 1.5 points, and he would have lost had the Perot votes been split up. So I don't know. It's going to matter. It's going to matter because when you have two people that are known by 100% of the American people, but wind up in polls at 40%, these third-party candidates are going to get a look. So we'll see how it plays out. It's the wild card. It's the wild card.
Governor Gilmore,
Great question from a fellow Bobcat.
That's right. We're just about out of time, but a brief comment on third parties?
I think that it's hard for a third party to emerge as a matter of law in the United States of America. Ballot access is so difficult, it's very hard. And besides that, the people of the United States understand the general directions of the Republican and the Democratic Party, and there's a great deal of party loyalty, real loyalty to the Democratic and Republican parties that third parties just simply haven't earned. So as a result of that, I think it's very, very difficult for third parties to emerge. And I have no doubt that if Perot was very instrumental in that race. I have no doubt Bush lost because of Ross Perot. So they can be very influential. But as far as reemerging again, I think that we would require Congress to actually be rethinking the way that we restrict third parties as a matter of law. It's very, very hard to do in America.
Well, thank you very much.
It's also very difficult to end this conversation. This is what we refer to in public radio as a driveway moment for the entire audience. Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a Friday forum panel discussion on the upcoming Republican and Democratic national conventions and the 2016 presidential election. Community partners for our program include the Akron Press Club, the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland, NOVA, and the Ray C. Bliss Institute of Applied Politics. We thank you all for your partnership. Additionally, we welcome guests at tables hosted by the Cleveland Clinic, the Cleveland Metro Bar Association, and Porter Wright. We thank you very much for your attendance and your support. That brings us to the end of today's program. Dr. Green, thank you very much. Governor Gilmore, Susan Page, David Wilhelm, thank you all very much. It's great to have you all. Ladies and gentlemen, our forum is adjourned. I would encourage you to check out the political item collection in the back. It's very appropriate for today.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.